Okay, good afternoon, everyone. I'm Marta Hernandez, the Executive Director of Californians Together. We are a statewide advocacy coalition that includes all sectors of the education landscape. Our members come together to champion the educational success of California's English learners by closing opportunity gaps resulting from systemic linguistic, academic, racial, and cultural inequities. I want to officially welcome everyone to this exciting webinar focused on introducing our newest and long-awaited publication, the Preschool Transitional Kindergarten Toolkit for implementing the California English Learner Roadmap that is focused on developmentally appropriate, culturally and linguistically sustaining early education for California's dual language learners. And it is written by none other than Dr. Lori Olson. And Lori needs no introduction, but I do want to highlight that she is a founding and current board member of Californians Together. She co-chaired the California's English Learner Roadmap Policy Work Group. And with over 5 decades of experience, she has focused on educational equity, particularly for immigrants, English learners, dual language learners, bilingualism, and language access. A national expert on English learner education, she has published extensively, and I now am just thrilled to have her present this webinar on her latest publication. So I'm turning it over to you, Lori.
Thank you, Martha, and good afternoon, everyone. As Martha said, this toolkit feels like it's been a long time coming, and I have to say that after my many decades of working to build the knowledge base and the policy base and the practice models for really for the kinds of early childhood education for culturally, linguistically diverse communities, I really see this moment that we're in right now as absolutely pivotal and crucial. It's a time, as the cliche goes, of great opportunity and real danger. California's investment in expanding early childhood education comes at the same time as more and more and more of our young ones are from families speaking languages other than English from all over the globe. And that means that we're sweeping this new generation of dual language learners into a system which isn't yet prepared really to embrace them or serve them well, and that has a troubling history that we all know of inequities and inadequate responses to them. So I would add to that notion of opportunity and danger also responsibility. Our responsibility, if we're doing this, to really do it right. So our webinar today that is really a response. The toolkit is a response to that sense of urgency and responsibility of the need to give our teachers, our systems, the support they need to really provide the kind of early foundation for young dual language learners as they begin their journey into schooling. The webinar is going to acquaint you with the toolkit, what's in it, the content of it, and a sense of how you might use the various tools and readings and resources in it in your work. And it's explicitly organized around the principles of California's aspirational English Learner Roadmap policy, but it also reflects the shared vision and aligned purpose of both the roadmap and California's Master Plan for Early Learning. At this point, more than half of California's children 5 and under live in homes in which languages other than English are the family language. A third of those who enter kindergarten have little to no proficiency in English, which is the language of the schooling system, and are considered English learners. And almost half are children of immigrants, representing every corner of the globe, although most are from Latin America or Asian nations, with Mexico as the leading country of origin. And they represent over 100 different language groups, although the vast majority, 84%, are Spanish speakers, and 94% of them speak just 10 languages. It's just an amazing diversity, and yet, since the civil rights movement of the 60s, it's taken landmark civil rights legislation and court cases to really establish the responsibility of our system, of our schooling, to address that long history of exclusionary politics, policies, practices, and attitudes that have relegated this very group of students to inferior educations. California, as we all know and have lived, has been a battleground for English only and anti-immigrant movements, but it's also been filled with prouder moments where we've been a leader nationally in standing up for language minority and immigrant children's rights to an education and for quality early care. but it has always taken movements of parents and teachers and advocates to build the demand for that, the research, the knowledge base, the practices, the programs that are the foundation for culturally and linguistically inclusive schooling. In 2017, California ended a devastating 2 decades of an English-only era in our state with the adoption of the English Learner Roadmap policy that superseded that dangerous Prop 227. This new policy is visionary and aspirational in many ways, laying out a vision from early childhood through high school graduation, establishing 4 research-based principles meant to guide all of us, all of our programs and policies from preschool explicitly through grade 12. And it explicitly states that the roadmap requires early childhood educators and districts to design and enact services that support dual language development and promote early childhood education as a crucial part of the journey of our English learners and dual language learners. Well, parallel to that work, to establish this new vision, California has also been building for decades an increasing commitment to quality early childhood education, recognizing how essential it is. And in the past 6 years, that has culminated in another historic state policy commitment, which is the California Master Plan for Early Learning and Care, signed into law by the governor just a few years after the roadmap was passed, and signaling historic investment in expansion of UPK. And it's those 2 policies together that knit a deep commitment to early childhood education and the need to explicitly address the cultural linguistic diversity of the majority of our state's young children. And although the master plan focuses on children birth to 5 and a mixed delivery system, while the roadmap focuses on TK through high school, they really share a central focus on dual language learners. They celebrate bilingualism. They view home language and culture as assets. They promote culturally, linguistically responsive and developmentally appropriate practice and champion family engagement. Both require that we gear up the capacity and understanding across our state for what that really means in practice. And so we set about to create a toolkit that could really speak to our 4-year-olds and 5-year-olds across the system, to weave together at the intersection of those powerful policies, a resource chock full, quite big, copy posted for you here in the chat, but it's also downloadable for free and purchasable on Californian Together's website. It's designed to do a couple things: to support you, preschool directors, elementary school district administrators, to understand and make meaning of the vision and principles of the roadmap in the context of early education, to offer information and guidance about dual language learners and research-based approaches to support their learning and development, and to provide tools that you can use for reflection on practices through the lens of research in that knowledge base, to identify priority areas for action and planning, and to engage others in needed dialogue and commitment to change to serve our dual language learners. But before I get into the toolkit itself, let's get a sense of who's in the call. We have 2 polls. The first one is, what sector of education do you primarily identify with? It might be preschool and early childhood education. It might be TK in the primary grades. Maybe you embrace the P through 3 work or other. Please answer that. And the second question is, how familiar are you already with the English Learner Roadmap? Little or no familiarity, fairly familiar, very familiar, actively engaged in implementing it, kind of where are you there? So take a minute to answer, and we will see who's on the call. Let's see. 2 people have answered so far. Let's see. David, are you going to be pushing out some responses to see what we're getting from people at this point?
We usually wait for 80% at least to participate, so we're almost there.
Okay, folks.
Just a few more.
And while that's happening, I just want to note, I cannot see the chat on my screen, so I don't know whether anybody can do it. There we go. All right, thank you. All right. What we can see is that Many of you are on the TK primary grades, about half of you, but we do have about a fifth of us that are really solidly in the preschool, early childhood education end of things. And people are kind of split on the amount of familiarity with the roadmap. So, so we do have a really good cross-section. I'm so pleased to see that, because one of our goals in all of this, one of the things we all need to do is to create from what have been siloed and separate systems, a really shared vision of what it is we're doing with the young dual language learners in the state. Thank you. Okay, I want to encourage you as we get into the roadmap itself to actively use the chat. As we make our way through the toolkit, I'm going to be pointing out all kinds of resources in it. And we really just want to know, do you find this useful? Does this speak to any of the issues that you're currently challenged with? You might be thinking, oh, gee, I could use this toolkit to do some walkthroughs, or this really addresses certain challenges that are really on my mind. And so please use the chat, and we can use that as a way to communicate with each other and for you to ask any questions you may have. Okay, let's crack the cover of this new resource. And it starts with an introductory section, as you can see, which sets out the purpose of the toolkit, discusses how to use the toolkit. It reviews the master plan for early learning and the roadmap, grounding the toolkit in those two policies. So I recommend for everybody that you kind of start with introduction. Once you've done that, you can branch out and sort of pick and choose which are the things that seem of most interest or concern to you. But I want to point out that the toolkit was really written with the understanding that the early education field and the K-12 systems have historically existed quite separately. Different histories, different pedagogical bases, different funding, different governance. And what this toolkit does is it tries to speak to both of those worlds to help us build understanding in and across it. So the toolkit is really meant for that. And there are parts of it that speak specifically to preschool leaders, giving background information about the K-12 system and the whole history of civil rights and the infrastructure around English learner education and the terminology, et cetera, and providing some resources from the K-12 system that may not have been so familiar to you. And similarly, there are some things in it that are explicitly written for elementary school readers. That's really background information about early childhood pedagogy and that whole wonderful base of knowledge, developmentally appropriate practice, about the system itself, including the mixed delivery system and the kind of terminology that's used in the early ed side of things. And so as we go, I'm going to be pointing out things that are specifically for one group or another, but you can see it right there already in the introduction. As, for example, you can see on pages 17 to 18, there's an overview making sense of the preschool landscape for all of those TK6 administrators and principals that don't really understand the mixed delivery system, may not be familiar with the terminology and some of the rich resources from the preschool landscape. And similarly on page 19, written for preschool directors and leaders, is something on making sense of the TK12 English learner landscape. And that's followed then with a reflection tool on page 20 to really think about, how prepared am I as a leader to really lead this work? What do I really need to understand better about that part of this world that has not been my training, my background, et cetera? So you'll see throughout the toolkit as we go that there are some things that are specifically for one group or another, but mostly it's about creating the crosswalk. After the introduction, there are 4 sections, and they're color-coded down the right-hand column, right-hand edges of the toolkit, one for each of the 4 principles of the English Learner Roadmap. You could choose one principle to focus on. That's really what you want to work on and kind of not get into the others. Or you could choose to work across all of them. But each section of it gives the actual text of the principle from the roadmap and its elements. It provides some exploration and interpretation of it in early childhood terms, doing a crosswalk back and forth between those worlds and the terminology of the roadmap, because the roadmap, while it definitely is meant to address early ed, it's not in the language of the early education system at all. There are readings in each section to help give meaning and readings that can be shared with staff, readings that can be used for the basis of discussions. And there are tools in each section for planning, reflection, and inquiry. And each section has a whole list of resources for further learning. And so let's dive into principle 1 so you can really get an example, a picture of what is in it. Principle 1 is the foundational principle, and many people call it asset-based, student responsive as sort of short term, but it's really about honoring and embracing the cultures and languages of the children and families in classrooms and programs that are responsive to who the children are, culturally, linguistically, developmentally. It's about building strong family and community partnerships, all of which involves knowing who the children and families are and what it means to be a dual language learner. So the content of this section, if you turn to page 25 through 66, I did say this was a hefty document, begins with the text from the roadmap and an activity for kind of drawing meaning from it, delves into 8 key understandings about dual language learners that need to undergird everything. And we're going to look a little deeper at that in a minute. It goes into issues of data collection, how the early childhood system learns about the families and the children and their languages and cultures, et cetera, and issues related to how we can learn about them. With reflection tools and activities on the impacts of immigration and immigration status. There's a whole section on valuing and building strong family partnerships, valuing and building upon the cultural and linguistic assets, and affirming and protecting home languages and supporting bilingualism. So that's the stuff of principle 1. And we're going to look a little deeper in a minute about at some of these things, because I want you to become familiar with the types of tools as well as the content. So one of them is, I kind of skipped ahead a little bit for a minute, but focuses on foundational understandings that without which we're not going to be serving our dual language well. So if you turn to page 26 through 28, you'll see it, these 8 understandings. It discusses how absolutely central language is, the development of language for children in that developmental phase 0 to 8. Their brains are wired for language. It's crucial for a period for developing language. But for our dual language learners, those years are particularly critical because it's the development of 2 or more language systems in relationship to each other. The vulnerability of their home language as they move into an English-speaking world really is affected as their ability to really develop bilingually. If we want to leverage and support their bilingualism, we need to pay attention particularly to what's happening in these years. And because their language development involves both of their languages, we have to be sure that teachers and staff and parents all understand they have the capacity to learn more than one language. And in fact, it is tremendously beneficial. Nothing is lost by engaging them in developing more than one language, and there's a world to be gained. While bilingualism is clearly an asset for everyone with significant benefits, it's a necessity for our dual language learners who live in and across multiple language worlds. And it's in this reading that it really establishes how crucial that is during this vulnerable time of language loss, of language rejection that many young children go through when they enter the English-speaking world. So our programs have to be places that really actively are supporting and affirming the value of their bilingualism. The reading is followed, the reading on these 8 things is followed with a reflection tool on page 28, where it really prompts reflection and dialogue about the degree to which these things are understood by the teachers, the staff, the parents, and your community. And you can think about which of these might be something we might do some reading together about, some discussion, some thinking about. This on the webinar is not the time to actually use that reflection tool or do the reading, but I want you to know that it's here and it might be something you want to return to. 2 other glimpses into principle 1 that give other pictures of the kinds of tools and resources in the toolkit include an example of crosswalks. So if you turn to page 29 through 32, it's an example of a crosswalk that takes the language of the English learner principles, which admittedly are not in early childhood terminology, and crosswalks them with key documents and frameworks that are relied upon and well known in the early childhood education field. So For example, NAEYC, National Association for the Education of Young Children's core values, their equity position statement, Head Start's multicultural principles, anti-bias curriculum goals, and the California preschool program guidelines. So in each of those, it's lined up with 4 aspects of the roadmap principle around the role of families, caring, affirming, and safe communities, culturally responsive practice, and equity-focused practice. You can see through this that there's somewhat different terminology in those 2 worlds, but in fact, there's tremendous strong alignment in terms of what we're trying to accomplish. And actually, the ECE world documents provide much more descriptive guidance about practice than the roadmap does, which was written generally to apply all the way from preschool through 12th grade. So this is meaning making, this is sense making, this enables there to be a dialogue across the 2 systems. This enables people to look at the roadmap and see in what ways it really is an early childhood policy. There are crosswalks like this in other sections as well, but this is an example of the crosswalks. Another example from Principle 1 is a reflection tool for looking at and thinking about practice. So on pages 64 to 65, you can see that this tool sets up a whole set of indicators of what you would see in practice in a program. It's divided into various sections, from valuing the cultures and languages of children and families, or creating a climate in which children see themselves reflected and affirmed, or supporting dual language development. And you can pick any one of those sections to focus on or look at all 3. And the tool allows you to do a little bit of ranking from this is not present in our classrooms all the way to this is one of our strengths. And then there's that column, I don't know, I need to learn more. And that last one helps build an agenda for inquiry and dialogue. So these type of indicator tools, again, appear throughout the toolkit. And they're meant to be used for individual reflection by leaders like you, and for collective reflection, where you may be involving other teachers or other people, and as a basis for dialogue. So the readings in this and other sections can be read collectively or just used for your own information, but you might also want to isolate some specific quotes for dialogue and reflection. Like, for example, this one from Principle 1. They bring their language with them as part and parcel for how they see the world and who they are. The language is there, either being ignored and undermined by their schooling experience, or being welcomed and utilized as a resource for themselves and others. So you can imagine the kind of discussion that might ensue by picking out some key quotes as a group of teachers or parents reflect on the quote in terms of what they feel is really happening in the program. It'll be very enlightening for you as a leader, and very just helpful for people beginning to explore what it really means to do quality early education for our dual language learners. Now, there are lots of other resources in this section on Principle 1. If you're working with TK teachers wondering about how they can learn about their children's language use, particularly now that we're not doing the assessment of the LPAC, they might want to learn about the data collection instruments that are used in California State preschool programs or by Head Start, or et cetera. So you might want to encourage them to look at that or look at that together. Or if you've got some families struggling with immigration status issues, it might be the time to engage your staff in the reading and the activity on the impacts of immigration status on children and families. There is a lot in here for Principle 1. And I've done a real quick fly through. I'd like to pause for a minute and just invite you to please write into the chat, as you've been hearing all this, where and how and with whom can you imagine maybe using some of these readings, tools, or charts from Principle 1? Did anything stand out to you as particularly useful? So let's take a minute and give you a chance to rest from hearing me and to share what you're thinking, what you're seeing. And I look forward to seeing it in the chat. Okay. Give you a minute to write, to think about some of what I pointed out. Yeah, teachers during TCT time or a monthly study group. What a great idea. In meetings and staff meetings with the TK cohort during PLC time. Yeah, I'm wondering if there are a particular aspect of Principle 1 that struck you as, oh yeah, immigration status, that's a good one for us, or family engagement or something like that. Is there any of the content that you were particularly interested in pursuing, looking at? Thank you to those of you who have written in here. Yeah, dual language education principles for sure. The quote you shared, yeah. Yeah, so just be thinking about this and do your own mental post-its as you're going through. The data collection instruments, so important. This is one of those things where the preschool world has so much richness and understanding family context to learn about. And the TK world could really use some of that. Yeah, so keep your comments coming. It's very helpful for me to know what you're thinking of as we're going through. I'm going to go on, continue, write in the chat if you want, but I want to go to principle 2. Remember, there's 4 principles in this English Learner Roadmap. And wait a minute, there we go. Principle 2 is summarized as intellectual quality of instruction and meaningful access. Again, not the language of the preschool world, but this is the one that encompasses the teaching and learning aspects, the instruction and curriculum pieces, where it really calls out in the language of the principle, developmentally appropriate learning. It calls for the integration of language, literacy, and content learning, the scaffolding of access and participation so that dual language learners can be part of everything and the full curriculum. And this is also that specifically calls out developing proficiency, bilingual proficiency, really developing those skills of 2 languages. So to give you a sense, a taste of this section of Principle 2, I'm going to point your attention this time to a big 30 pages, pages 70 to 101, which is organized around a set of questions. The questions that I get as I go around the state working with people on the roadmap implementation who are working in preschools and transitional Ks. So it's written in a question and answer format with very meaty responses, readings, as well as reflection tools and charts. And this is the section where early childhood pedagogy really gets laid out, and the English Learner Roadmap is interpreted in those terms. And this is where the pushback against push-down academics is taken on, and the pushback against monolingual lenses. So the first question, what does it mean in preschool context when you say English learners engage in intellectually rich, developmentally appropriate learning experiences? It's a big question. And the answer lays out how young children learn and what that means for what needs to be happening in developmentally appropriate classrooms and programs. The implications of things like the fact that young children are so concrete and hands-on and exploratory, little scientists, play-based learners, thriving in integrated thematic curriculum, the importance of all domains of their development, what it means for us to be culturally inclusive and appropriate as we teach. And it's also where we talk about the centrality of relationships, which is how young children learn. So if you're facing tendencies, particularly in TK these days, but also in preschool classrooms more and more, for them to look like mini first grade classrooms, this is a crucial section to really work on. There's tremendous richness in it, and I'm going to come back and cover a few additional things about it in a minute. But question B is somewhat related, because this is where the roadmap says, experiences integrate language development, literacy, and content learning, and language development occurs in and through content and is integrated throughout content. Certainly related, of course, to developmentally appropriate practice, but it goes much deeper than that. And this is the section where you're going to find readers on language development, bilingual development, content learning, early literacy, what that means and what it doesn't mean, what it doesn't look like. Again, with a big emphasis on reinforcing quality early childhood pedagogy and combating a push-down pedagogy. Particularly important these days as misguided efforts at early literacy education begin to look like the isolated reading skill instruction that we see later on. So within this, if you turn particularly to page 81, I would like you to look at one of the kinds of charts that's set up, where it goes through educator roles and strategies and implications for directors and administrators. And it goes through each of the domains, through oral language development, through content learning, through early literacy, but they're set up similarly. So I just picked this one for the slide. But after a reading has laid out the issue, a research-based reading, the chart lists particular kinds of strategies you would see enacted in the classroom, with then a description in the middle column of why that strategy and its purpose. And then the third column, written for you and your role, what you need to do, what's the role of directors and administrators to make this happen, to be sure it's happening, to be looking for it, etc. So this is a section that is very near and dear to my heart, I have to say, but I only have time today to just do this one quick pointing it out to you. Because then there's the other questions. Remember, I told you this whole section is laid out around a set of questions. And there are 4 more questions then. Instructional scaffolding. What does that mean? What does it really mean to provide the kind of support for a child being in a program that's not their home language? How do we make it possible for them to participate and really access what's happening? Or the question about meaningful access to a full curriculum. Well, what does that even mean, a full curriculum in a preschool context? Or the question about home language, not just because we're affirming it, because it's a means of accessing content. It's the foundation for learning a second language, developed to high levels. And the reference in this principle to research-based language support programs, language models, and what that really looks like. And the question on what does it mean to talk about quality, relevant instructional materials that really support the kind of learning young people do. So those 4 questions, lots of meat in them. And then the last question that follows up this whole set of questions is, what does the roadmap mean by calling for high levels of English proficiency? What does that even mean for our little ones? And in this section, we take on very outdated beliefs about ELD or second language development for young children and what that even means, sets up the current understandings, and also shares from the brand new pre-K, TK learning foundations from the state, the way that they look at second language development, ELD, and the 3 levels of it. So that's a big part of the meat of Principle 2, but there's more in Principle 2, because it has reflection tools. And this example on page 103 to 107 looks at instruction and curriculum, particularly focusing with a section on each of these: developmentally appropriate practice, an integrated approach to learning, language-rich instruction, content focus, early literacy, support for bilingual development, support for ELD, a rich learning environment. And from each of these, again, you've got the indicators, and then you've got the kind of reflection things. Is this really a feature of our classrooms? Is this mostly somewhat true? Is it not really happening? Do I not know? Do I need to look at it? And is this a priority for us to do some working? So, and then that section on Principle 2 ends with resources, lots and lots of resources, places to turn. So again, that's a lot. And we want to give you a chance actually in small groups for a few minutes to really talk about it and to process as you're grappling with what TK should be, what a preschool should be in this era, what they have in common, what's appropriate and effective, not just developmentally, but culturally and linguistically. We want you to share a little bit about what you're thinking as I talked you through the readings, the tools, the kinds of charts in this principle, and does any of it to speak to some of those key concerns and issues you would like to see addressed. So you're going to go into small groups for a few minutes, and when you come back, we've got principles 3 and 4, and closing and doing some talking about advocacy that can really support this kind of work. So take it away into small groups, and we'll see you on the other end. Welcome back, everyone. You can't see the full list of who is on this webinar, but it's an amazing group, and I'm glad you had a few minutes to at least talk to each other. But I am going to go on now to Principle 3, and I want to introduce it with a quote from the toolkit that sums up why there is a Principle 3, and that is, the vast majority of educators, teachers, instructional assistants, administrators, and others want to provide their DLLs with the best early learning and education they can. The problem is, They don't always have the conditions to make that possible. And that's what principle number 3 is all about. The system conditions that make it possible to do what we need to do. And so that speaks to everything from leaders and educators knowledgeable of and responsive to who the English learners are. So that means the professional learning, the leadership development, valid assessments and data systems, resources, tiered support, and again, professional learning. And so the issues that are taken up in this section of the toolkit are exactly those. Lots on assessment, and we're going to look at that in a minute. About the importance of goals and explicit statements and vision statements that embrace the diversity of our communities and our children and our families. About leadership development, about professional learning and staff capacity, including a discussion of the teacher performance expectations and the different credentials and what we know to be the kinds of skills that teachers need. So let's just glimpse at a few things from this principle to sort of round out some of your sense of the kinds of things in the toolkit. On page 126 is where we really focus on assessment and drawing a lot from NAEYC and the various resources on what we mean by culturally, linguistically, and developmentally appropriate assessment practices. And it's both general about those assessment practices, it's about the deep assessments, like to really understand learning, et cetera, and it's about the kind of assessments that take place in classrooms. This is where we really go through and we describe California's quality rating system, so well known among those in the preschool world, but not at all known among those in TK and the leaders in primary grades at all. And so it discusses the DRDP and the different measures on the DRDP and the environmental reading scales. And it's a really good, this is one of those readings that's really meant for people who don't have a background in preschool education to really understand how to think about developmentally what we should be assessing. And like the others, this is where there are tools for reflection. So example on this slide is one of the kinds of tools that can be used to really look at your own program, your own teachers. Are they aware of the specific purposes of the assessments? Do they feel they have adequate time and support? Do they feel that they have the knowledge base to really assess their dual language learners, et cetera? And then there's a whole section on the capacity building, the key characteristics of what we know are needed by prepared and effective preschool and TK teachers, where we crosswalk the early childhood teacher performance expectations with the English Learner Roadmap, where we discuss issues of professional learning like time, like infrastructure, like coaching, where we discuss things like how to create the time and supports for professional learning to take place, and provide a lot of resources, like what's out there, who are the groups that are doing good professional learning, that have resources, that have videos, et cetera, that can be used. And this particular chart just shows you an example of that follows the reading on 7 essential elements of what teachers and staff for young dual language learners need to have. And you can be thinking about the implications for recruitment, both who and how you recruit, and the implications for preparation and early career support, as well as professional learning for those in the classroom. There are also materials on capacity building and professional learning, and a final note on this section. Really important that we recognize the enormous unbalance and inequities between the kind of flexibility, resources, staffing patterns in preschool as compared to transitional kindergarten. And we speak to that in the toolkit, and we speak to how to try to use those opportunities and those supports from the TK-12 system to really support those in the preschool system, so there can be a unified approach to preparing our staff. And so we have one more principle to go, folks. Hang in there, which is principle 4. But I'm going to be brief because by now I think you get how the toolkit works, the kinds of things that are in it, who it speaks to, and you can do your own browsing, picking and choosing what to read and what to focus on. But principle 4 is all about alignment and articulation. So crucial as we think about setting that powerful early foundation of development and learning as the beginning of a journey that's going to take kids through their schooling. because it's also about extending the system downward into the early years. And we know that in that there is that danger of losing the developmental focus for young children. But we also know that if we're not looking ahead to what they need as they move forward and the kind of development that sets them up for it, we're not going to do it well. So I call your attention in particularly in this section to the, for example, the kindergarten readiness section. Really ripe for dialogues between kindergarten teachers, TK teachers, preschool teachers, to really be thinking about what is important for them and what is particularly important for dual language learners, and to really build a different kind of understanding of kindergarten readiness, which is not just by the time they get to kindergarten, they have to know what kindergartners know. I call your attention to the pathways toward bilingualism, understanding that what we do with a child's home language in the preschool TK years has huge impact on their trajectory towards bilingualism and later biliteracy. These are the years they lose that. They lose that sense of identity, that sense of connection, that sense of status, and develop gaps in their home language. So really thinking about the pathways toward bilingualism, the supports for transitions as they move from preschool into TK into K, and vertical articulation is really crucial. So that's the stuff of Principle 4. And I invite you, you kind of stopped writing. I know it's getting late, but I would just love to know for Principles 3 and 4, is there anything in here that matches your sense of the issues that you are facing at this time? I'd love to get some sense of what you're thinking out there. Give you a minute. And again, we have posted for you the toolkit itself, far more than I could possibly mention in this 1-hour webinar. I'll give you a minute to write a little more before I kind of wrap up with one other type.
A toolkit? Yeah. But
Okay, yeah, so needed on the articulation thing. And Holly also mentions all the way preschool through 8th grade and how important that is to have that picture across it all. Yeah, thank you, Shelley, for writing in. Well, to wrap it up, because it is getting late, building community, yes. References and resources. So this is a really thick, big toolkit, and there's so much more that could have been in it. What's really important is that it point you toward the resources that are out there in the field, point you toward things you want to learn about and to where you can learn with it. And so in each section of the toolkit, as we're discussing a particular issue, you'll find some boxes with resources and some references to organizations, etc. And at the end of each principle section, there's even more. And then the final pages of the toolkit lists a lot of resources. And by that, we mean websites, publications, organizations doing great work that can support you. For example, it refers you multiple times to the Multilingual Learning Toolkit website. And if you don't know that website, what a rich body of resources for you, for teachers, for parents. We have all the publications and the related web pages from CDE across the multilingual division and the early care and learning division, etc. We have professional learning resources, including videos from places like SEAL and the Fresno Language Learning Project. That's the kind of richness that is in this toolkit as you pursue for yourself and your staff the kind of learning that needs to be going on. I want to let you know about one particular professional learning opportunity that is being offered by me through EPIC, which is the state's grant initiative to support the implementation of the roadmap. And that is, I'm leading a 2-day preschool education for dual language learners, a toolkit for preschool directors and school leaders that really, in those 2 days, goes deep into this toolkit. And it's happening through San Bernardino County, Sacramento County, Orange County, etc. And I encourage you to contact them if you're interested. I'm also going to be leading a trainer of trainers for those of you in county offices or district personnel that would like to really lead some kind of professional learning using the toolkit in your own areas. And that's one full day in person, really kind of personalizing for you how you might use it in your situations. And with that, I just want to say, I applaud you for all the work that you do. We've got a mighty task ahead of us to see to it that this expansion into that wonderful, amazing time of 3-year-olds, 4-year-olds, 5-year-olds, as we expand our systems to really embrace our dual language learners, that it really does them justice, that it honors them and their families and set them on the path that they need to be on. So may the toolkit be useful to you as you do that. And I hand it back to Martha Hernandez for the final words about some very important action.
And so as an advocacy organization, of course, we are reaching out to request your assistance in getting 2 of our co-sponsored bills signed by the governor. One includes AB 2074, and this is all focused on the implementation or the creation of a statewide implementation plan for the EL roadmap. And of course, it ensures the integration of the EL roadmap with other statewide initiatives. And unfortunately, we are disappointed that the funding for 3 CDE positions that we requested were removed from the bill, but we remain focused on prioritizing the statewide implementation of the roadmap, of which, of course, includes early learning and care. The bill establishes an advisory committee to guide the development of a statewide plan. And so with that, we have posted a social media toolkit, and that includes the way to take action, the way to provide your feedback to the governor so that he can sign this bill. And it's very, very simple. It's a couple of clicks, and you will make a big, big difference. In addition, something that is, let's see, there was, did I skip it? Yes. This is also on the governor's desk. And this also is focused on our dual language learners, AB 1947. This is co-sponsored between Californians Together and Early Edge. This expands the number of allowable staff training days, under California State Preschool contract from 2 to 6 days. And we all know how difficult it is to carve out professional development days, time, hours, minutes for our early learning educators. So please, again, take action, help us to get these 2 bills, these 2 critical bills for our early learners signed by the governor. We're waiting every day to see if they get signed. So again, we will continue the work to secure funding for the EL roadmap statewide implementation to help districts and school sites continue the work. So thank you very much. And Lori, do you have any final words?
Just, we got work to do together, and I can't imagine more wonderful people than those on this call to carry out this commitment. So thank you.
Thank you so much for spending this time with us.
And let us know how it goes and how you use the toolkit. We'd love to hear it.
Thank you.